Well, we are basically done with regression analysis. Okay? Of course, we will use the concept of regression analysis in Chapter 16, partly. Okay? But we are now getting into completely different area. Perhaps I mentioned it once before. Okay? Among all the data sets that you're going to handle, we can classify all of the data into two different categories, right? Cross-section data versus time series data set. Okay? And the difference is, think about the grade book that I used as an example. Okay? We have homework 1, homework 2, E1, and so on. And we have Bob, Mary, Jack, Judy. Right? So when you have these homework scores or first exam scores, if you look at it this way, column-wise, okay, we have the data on different individual, right, or different entities. Okay? Entities means it could be person, it could be individual people, person, right, or it could be company. Right? If you think about Dow Jones or stock chart, okay? The stock price as of, say, January, February, March, and so on. And you have GE, whatever, American Airlines, different companies. Okay? So you can have the information on different companies or different individual, right? Okay? That's what we mean by cross-section data. Okay? Cross-section data are the information collected on different entities. Okay? Time series data are the information collected on one individual or one entity over different point in time. Okay? So if you look at row-wise here, right? The Bob's homework score, exam score, and so on, right? Over time, you can say this is a time series data. Well, this is a slightly different format, but considering that these assignments and exams were given at different point in time, okay? You can still consider this time series data. Okay? But if you look at let's say G's performance, let's say their quarterly earnings, okay? On the first quarter, second quarter, and third quarter, and so on, right? Then this is definitely a time series. Okay? So as you can imagine, in economics and business, we deal with time series data frequently. Okay? A lot of the data or information that we handle are time series data. Okay? Ultimately, what we want to do with time series data is forecasting. Right? Just like when we were dealing with regression analysis, ultimately what we wanted to do was making a prediction, right? Prediction on Y variable. Okay? Well, here in time series data, our interested variable, okay, is still Y. Okay? And instead of Y as a function of x1, x2, and so on, right? We are dealing with Y as a function of time. Okay? So graphically, let's say this is G performance. then you have Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, say 2000, and the next year 2001, Q1, Q2, and so on, right? So we're going to have something like that, right? That's the dependent variable, and independent variable is time. Okay? Of course, unit of time could be quarter, years, months, hours, seconds, whatever, right? It could be many different type of measurements of time. Okay? So that's what we are dealing with. Okay? So you might think, well, what's the difference? Okay? If you have just simple linear regression, y is a plus bx, or let's say beta naught plus beta 1x, okay? Then we could have that kind of graph. Okay? And we could have found, say, trend. Okay? In the Microsoft Excel, right? There is a trend function, right? And if you use that function, that will give you exactly the equation of this linear regression line. Okay? So what's the difference? Well, the difference is there's one little assumption we had to deal with previously, right? Serial correlation. Or independence assumption, right? You remember there were 4 assumptions for regression analysis, LINE, right? Linearity, independence, normality, and what? Equal variance, LINE, right? The second assumption there was independence, right? And independence means there shouldn't be any correlation among the errors. Okay? In other words, we have no serial correlation. Right? What that means was if you, let's say, estimated this equation, right? B0 plus B1x. Okay? Of course, you're going to have some errors. Right? Because the actual observation will be not exactly on the line all the time, right? The assumption was this sometimes positive error, sometimes negative error, right? This error should be randomly distributed. You shouldn't have any pattern, right? You shouldn't see any pattern. If you see any pattern, that's a problem. That's a violation of this assumption, right? Well, when you're dealing with cross-section data, this assumption is usually satisfied, right? There is no reason to doubt that the assumption would be violated, right? But when you're dealing with time series data like this, right, then we frequently observe the violation of this assumption, right? Something like, well, this kind of pattern, right? I'm talking about GE here, but suppose this was some company like Coca-Cola, right? And major products of Coca-Cola are soft drinks, right? Coke and some other Fanta or whatever, right? Some other products. Okay? So you can easily imagine their earnings will be high during the summertime and probably low in the winter time, right? So there is kind of seasonality, right? Okay. If the second quarter belongs, if the let's say June, July, August belong to second quarter, right? Then it will be above the trend line, right? During the winter months, it will be below the trend line, right? And that repeats, right? Every year, right? So if you just use simple linear regression to fit this equation, y hat as by beta naught plus B1 time, right? Then when you look at the error or residual plot, okay, you're going to have this kind of pattern, right? That's the problem. Okay? So that's why we don't really apply this regression technique directly to the time series data when we are dealing with time series data. We have to use a little bit different technique. Okay? Actually, quite different technique. Yeah. All right. So here, the first slide talks about importance of forecasting. Okay? In other words, importance of time series analysis in especially business and economics fields. Yeah? Government forecast unemployment rates, interest rates, and expected revenues from income taxes for policy purposes, right? When whether you run the government or whether you run a company, right, or a school or whatever, right, you have to make some plans, okay? Plans for the future, right? And in order to make any plan for the future, you have to have some idea what's going to happen in the future, right? And that's the concept of forecasting. Okay? So if you're running the government, you will have to forecast many numbers, right? Population growth, especially when you're dealing with, say, city government, right? Then always try to project the growth rate of the population in that particular city or area, right? And then you also have to try to predict, many the other factors like inflation, okay, interest rate, okay, and so on. Right? Marketing executives try to forecast the demand, sales, consumer preference, all kinds of those variables. Okay? College administrators forecast enrollments. Okay? Well, right now the situation in Korea is the population is, well, the college age population is projected to go down, right, to shrink, right? So the education department is trying to reduce the number of colleges, right? And they're doing all kinds of, things, require all kinds of standards to these colleges, okay? And if certain colleges cannot meet certain standards, right, they are closing down these, the colleges, right? Yeah, so that's based on the forecast of population forecast and the forecast of enrollments in the future. Okay? Retail stores forecast demand to control inventory levels and to decide to make the hiring decision, okay? And so on. Okay? So I think you can easily agree that the planning is essential in any business, right? And in order to make plan, you need to forecast, right? You need to make some projection for the future, right? And for that purpose, we're going to use time series analysis. Okay? All right, what are the approaches to forecasting? Okay? There are two basic approaches, quantitative forecasting versus qualitative forecasting. Okay? Quantitative forecasting on the right-hand side here, okay? This can be used when you have data. In other words, when you know the past history, when you have information on what happened in the past, right? Then you can use quantitative analysis. Okay? And here, the more detailed way of using quantitative forecasting, we have time series versus causal. Okay? Time series, that's what we're going to talk about in this chapter. Causal analysis. What do you mean by causal? Any idea? Other what?
Other than time.
Other what?
Other than like time. That's from other variables.
Other variables? Yeah, okay. Causal, I mean, it comes from cause. Yeah? What is causing this variable of interest to change? Okay? In other words, what are the factors that change the y variable, what brings the changes in y variable? Well, we've been talking about that for the entire semester, right? Something like this, right? So x1 causes y to change. What's the relationship? In other words, if x1 increases by 1 unit or 1%, what happens to y? Or if x2 increases or decreases by 1% or 1 unit, what happens to y, right? And so on, right? So what it's saying is you can use regression analysis to make a forecast, right? But you have to be careful. You have to keep in mind that we have this possibility. So you will learn towards the end of this chapter, we actually use a regression analysis, bring the regression analysis back, and include the time or season, something like season variable, okay, to find out the effect of season on, let's say, on your sales, holding other things constant, right? That will be the causal analysis. Okay? Time series analysis will be purely based on time. Forget about all other factors, right? What's the trend? I mean, what is the trend and pattern? Okay? So just like stock investing, if you have learned anything about the stock investing, there are two basic approaches in the stock investing or making a financial market investment. Okay? The traditional, conventional approach is like what's his name? Oracle of Omaha. Keep forgetting his name. The richest guy in stock market who made the biggest. Oracle of Omaha, you don't know him? What's his name? No idea? I'm sure it'll come in a few minutes. So, Warren Buffett. Okay? So when you start any investment, they recommend you to read at least a couple of books by Warren Buffett, right? And I did, right? And if you read this book, his approach is don't put down any single dime before you study the company's financial statements, right? So income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow statement, right? So his approach is he just examine all the numbers about this company's asset and debt and profitability and so on, right? And until he's satisfied. Unless he is satisfied, he doesn't invest any single cent in this company, right? That's the traditional approach. Okay? So that means you will pay attention to the economy and the interest rate and all kinds of factors, right, to make the investment decision. Yeah? The other approach is called the momentum approach. Okay? These guys say, forget about all those things, right? Or the income statement or balance sheet or whatever, doesn't matter. And many people tried it, and they didn't make any money. They actually lost money, right? So more important thing is if you have this kind of chart, stock chart, right? You can just analyze the chart, the momentum, something like, right? I don't really believe this, but apparently a lot of people follow this, and you can easily find this theory or some information on the web, right, on the internet, right? And there are all kinds of techniques, right? They draw so many different lines, okay? If you have this kind of pattern, right, then next few days it's gonna go up or down or whatever, right? So that's the idea of momentum investment, right? So the time series, what they're doing is purely time series analysis based on the changes in this Y variable or the stock price variable over time, right? They're trying to predict or forecast what's going to happen in the future, right? Well, usually near-term forecast tends to be fairly accurate, but longer-term forecast tends to be less accurate, of course, right? So that's, I guess, if you're trying to make a forecast for tomorrow, right, then maybe you're more fairly successful. You can be fairly successful, right? Well, for me, it didn't work. Okay, anyway. So that's the time series approach versus causal approach. Okay? Sometimes, though, we do not have this actual data, and yet we have to make a forecast. We have to make a decision, right? So either this kind of event has never happened before. This is the first time we're trying to do something, right? Completely new, right? But you have to make a forecast anyway, right? And frequently you can encounter this kind of situation in politics, right? Say, Mayor of Seoul City of Seoul, Mayor Mr. Park Won-sun, let's say he declared himself as a candidate for the next presidency in Korea, right? Well, it has never happened, right? But I'm sure political analysts will come up with all kinds of numbers, right? All kinds of projections, right? So you have to do that, right? So that's the idea, right? So obviously, this kind of approach is considered highly subjective and judgmental, right? So you will use probably all available information, but still there is no scientific or mathematical technique like this time series technique or regression technique, right? Here, most famous technique used in that case, the company, let's say a company is trying to start a new business, okay? And despite their efforts to come up with all kinds of relevant data, they cannot come up with really useful data for this completely new venture, right? Then, frequently what company does is use Delphi method. Some people pronounce it as Delphi, some people pronounce it as Delphi. I think most Americans pronounce it Delphi, but Delphi is actually the name of a location, the name of the region in Greece. Have you ever heard of Delphi? Oracle of Delphi, never heard of Oracle of Delphi? I'll show you a short video about the Oracle of Delphi. Okay? This, Apollo, right? One of the Greek gods, the god of what? Sun, right? Sun god, whatever. Apollo in Korean, or Abollo in Korean Bible. They say Abollo, right? Anyway, English pronunciation is Apollo, right? There is a temple for Apollo in Greece, okay? And there used to be a lady, prophet, right? And she used to be considered know-it-all. So, all the politicians, business leaders, or individuals, aristocrats, right? Rich people, right? Before they make any important decision, they came to this lady, right? Pythia, right? Pythia. The lady was called Pythia, comes from Python. Python is a huge snake, right? And there is an interesting story. I'm sure you can find out, or maybe you have read it. Okay? So this Pythia is supposed to be able to predict the future, right? And so the name Delphi method comes from this, right? The Delphi method goes like this. This is collects responses to a sequence of questionnaires, from collect responses to by a panel of experts. Okay? Important points here is anonymity. And responses shared among experts. Responses shared. Let me write it down. Responses shared among the experts. And usually no more than 2 to 3 rounds. Yeah? So the story is, let's say, you are automobile manufacturer, okay? Okay? And you're trying to get into an important decision. You heard that the cosmetics is a big business in Korea, not only for women, but the men's cosmetics is a big business in Korea. So looks like all kinds of international companies are flocking to Korea to sell the cosmetics. Anyway, so you're trying to make this completely new decision, right? You've been producing automobile, right? Now you're trying to get into the cosmetics business, right? And there is no such previous case, okay? So, you cannot find any past history or data on the, profitability or possibility of success in this kind of venture, right? So, what you do in that case is you gather a panel of experts. Maybe 2 to 5 people. 2 to 5 experts. Maybe 3 to 5, right? And then you make some questions, something that you want to know, right? The important thing is anonymity. These experts don't know each other. They don't know who else is participating, who else is the member of this panel, right? It's kept as secret, yeah? But you just send the questionnaire to each expert, okay, and get their response. Okay? So collect responses to a questionnaire from a panel of experts, okay? But you have to maintain anonymity. Okay? Then, once you receive the responses, you send them to other experts so that each expert can see other panel members' response. Right? And based on that, they can revise their answers. Right? After looking at what other panel members thought, right? Each panel member can revise their answers. Okay? So you can do it maybe 2 to 3 times. Right? And after this 2 to 3 times, you come up with the decision. You come up with the final conclusion, right? Based on these experts. Okay? So that's the idea of Delphi method. Okay? And it's an important decision-making mechanism or decision-making technique in management. Okay? Delphi method. Right? Shows you what happened to your interest variable. This is, at this time, your variable of interest is inflation rate in the United States. And on the horizontal axis, you're going to have time, right? And this time, in this case, the time unit is years. Okay? So starting from 1975 to 2001, it shows the rate of inflation. Okay? And, before you start any analysis, it's always a good idea to look at the plot, right? Look at just a kind of scattergram. When we were doing regression analysis, I recommended you always start with the scattergram, okay? Between y and x, okay? By looking at this scattergram, you can get some idea of the kind of relationship between y and x, okay? In time series, why don't you look at the time series data, okay? The difference here is what's the difference between scattergram and time series plot? Yeah? Well, when you were dealing with the y and x in cross-section data, right, for particular x value, let's say 10, right, you could have had multiple y values. Because sometimes for, let's say, 10 ounce of fertilizer, right, you could have collected, say, 25 pounds of tomato, right? But sometimes it could result in 35 pounds of tomato, right? So you could have multiple observations for one particular x value, right? When you are dealing with time series, they cannot happen, right? Because we have time on the horizontal axis, right? And you're collecting one particular variable, say inflation, annual inflation rate, right? So if you have 1980, 1985, and so on, right? For one particular year, you can have only one observation. You cannot have more than one observation for each particular value of time, right? So that's why you can have just this kind of plot rather than scattergram. Okay? Alright, so when we are dealing with economics and business data, we typically think there are 4 components, okay, in the time series data. Okay? There's a trend component. Trend component shows us the long-term trend. Okay? So when you think, let's say, inflation, annual inflation over the years, okay, there may be some long-term trend, okay, something like that. Okay? So typically we call it the overall persistent long-term movement of the data, okay? Or many times we call it secular trend. Okay? Again, that's the same thing. We think about GDP data of South Korea, let's say, right? Starting from 1950, let's say, 1950 to 2015, right? Then, of course, right, you will see, a lot of movements, okay? But the trend may be something like this, okay? Some exponential growth, okay? The explosive growth since 1970s, something like that, right? Cyclical component deals with the usually business cycle. Okay? So in the, let's say GDP, okay, of South Korea, okay? Even though there is an increasing trend, okay? Sometimes it's above the trend, sometimes it's below the trend, right? Due to some business cycle, recession, recovery, boom, and so on, right? So typically, in the business cycle, do like this, okay? So this is a long-term trend, okay? And there is a boom. This is called the bust. Okay? Or more academic term is this peak and trough. Okay? The period between boom and bust, this is called recession. Okay? The period between bust and the next boom is called recovery. Okay? So there are 4 segments, okay, in the business cycle. Okay? The length of cycle is typically, I think it comes later, but yeah, length of cycle is typically measured from boom to boom or bust, peak to peak, from trough to trough. Okay? And in reality, the length of typical cycle is 4 to 8 years. 4 to 8 years. So, we find out this business cycle repeats every 4 to 8 years. Okay? Why? What do you think? What's causing this business cycle? Any reason? Many reasons? Good answer. But we call it political business cycle. Right? Political business cycle. Yeah? Because the nuance is this business cycle is caused by politics. And the evidence is that it is repeating every 4 to 8 years. Okay? Because every 4 years we have presidential election. In Korea, it's every 5 years. Okay? But in most countries, okay, every 4 years. Okay? So, when the election time comes, the incumbent government will do everything possible to strengthen the economy. Because if the economy is bad, then the incumbent government, incumbent party, right, will not be able to be re-elected. Right? There's a chance for re-election is very slim if the economy is terrible, right? So, when election in Korea next year is election year, right? 2017, right? So starting from, I guess, about this time and the next year, right? The incumbent party will do everything possible to strengthen the economy, right? They're doing, this. How do you do that? Well, usually spending, right? You spend a lot of money, right? And reduce taxes, right? Well, so that usually causes recovery or strengthening economy, right? But once you are elected, you can't do that anymore, right? Once your party is elected as president or majority in the Congress, right? You have to reverse it. Why? Why do you have to reverse it? That's right. I mean, no government has unlimited budget, unlimited resource, right? Every government has, every country has, every city has limited budget, limited resource, right? So, last year or year and a half, you have spent so much and you have collected, lower taxes. That means your budget is probably in deficit, right? So, as soon as you are elected, you have to reverse the course, right? You cut the spending, increase the taxes, right? Otherwise, your government will go bankrupt, right? So, when that happens, the economy slows down, goes into a recession, right? And a few years later, when the election approaches, you have to do this again, once again, right? So that's so far the most popular and credible reason or explanation for this business cycle. Other than that, there is no reason why in this boom and recession and recovery will have to repeat every 4 to 8 years. Okay? So unfortunately, we see that in a lot of economics and finance data. Okay? And then seasonal component. I explained it already, right? A lot of businesses have this seasonality. Okay? Not only in the software industry, apparel industry, is the retail merchandising industry, like Walmart, Target, or Family Dollar stores, all kinds of this retail industry. In Korea, what E-Mart, Home Plus, or whatever, right? These businesses, right? I worked for Family Dollar stores for 1 year as a senior analyst, okay? And so I know that. I mean, in most of the retail industries, their Christmas sales, starting from November and December, 2-month sale, is almost half of their annual sales. Okay? It's a huge sales, big time, right? And so, starting from beginning of year, the Christmas plan starts in February, right? So, Christmas is a crazy time. December is a crazy time. And so, in January, everybody slows down and you have to do some, the cleaning up, right? All kinds of cleaning up. But starting in February, they plan the next Christmas. So you have to come up with what's going to be, that's another forecasting. You have to forecast 10 months later, 10 months after, what's going to be popular, what item is going to be popular next Christmas, right? In apparel or toys or whatever, right? Or what kind of gifts will people give, right, for next Christmas, right? So once they are determined, then you have to search for suppliers, okay? And of course, these days, most of the supplies come from China, okay? So in second floor of this headquarter, Family Dollar's headquarter building, right? There's a huge lobby, okay? And you always see these people with these bags, you know? They're trailing their bags, they're travel bags, right? Huge bags, usually more than one, right? So these are the salespeople from China or some other location, and what they have in the bags are sample, right? So the department that handles this purchasing department, right, will see these salespeople and discuss the quality and the price and everything, right? So by March or April, you have to place order of these items, right? How many, what items, how many, what the price is, right? So once the order's placed, this item will be shipped to the United States from China probably by June, right? June, July, right? So by August, September, you have to start distributing these items to the local stores, okay? At that time, in 2006, when I was working for that company, they had about 6,000 stores in the United States, right? In 43 states, okay? And the distribution is, it's a massive operation. They have 9 distribution centers across the United States, okay? 9 huge warehouses. Okay? The name is warehouse, but these days, if you go into this warehouse, in the old days, that was really the warehouse. You would see the pile of items, pile of boxes, right? And the workers would move items from one place to another, right? Using the trucks, or what do you call that? 지게차, yeah? What do you call it? Lift, right? Lifters. Yeah? These days, it's amazing. It's just a maze of conveyor belts, right? And these boxes are on the conveyor belts that move at high speed. And these boxes all have barcodes on every side, right? So as the boxes are flying through the conveyor line, there are barcode scanners everywhere, right? So the computer knows what this box contains and where this box is headed to, right? So at the end of all, there's a huge, let's say this, you're looking at this building from the sky, right? From the top. This is roof of the building, right? On each side, there are truck bays, right? In Charlotte, North Carolina, that's the headquarters of Family Dollar store. So this is warehouse number 1. That's the oldest warehouse. Okay? On each side, you have 50 truck bays. Okay? So, those 18-wheelers, huge truck, right? This is even larger than the largest truck you see in Korea on the highways. Okay? There's the semis pulling this trailer. Okay? So you have wheel here, and here. Okay? So total of 18 wheel, 18 tires. Okay? It's a huge trucks. Okay? And you can have 50 of those trucks on each side. Okay? So this is receiving this is sending or shipping. Okay? So on one side, they receive these deliveries from the suppliers, okay? And inside the warehouse, they sort and repack, and mostly it's done by the computer and using the conveyor belts. Okay? And on the shipping side, shipping dock, so all the boxes come piled in at the end of the building, right? And so these days, really, there aren't many human labor inside the building. Everything's automated, right? The only thing that people do these days is once you have all the boxes, all kinds of boxes, starting from cookies and detergents and apparels and whatever, right? And let's say this truck goes to South Carolina, right? South Carolina, say Central South Carolina, or whatever, right? Then the people just already piled boxes on this dock, right? They put them on the what do you call it? Some sort of board, right? And wrap around with plastics and push them into the truck. That's it, right? So, all the sorting and the moving the boxes are done automatically. Right? It's a very high-tech operation. Okay? People are expensive, and that's another story. But one project they asked me to do was how can we save cost in warehouse because the turnover is just too much. Okay? In other words, people quitting. The people in the warehouse quitting their job. Okay? And you have to constantly hire new people, and you have to train them, right? And that's very expensive, right? And well, we analyzed everything, including the temperature in the warehouse, because it's very hot, right? Inside the warehouse, especially southern area, southern region in Texas, so South Carolina, and North Carolina, it's very hot. So they thought, well, that's why people are quitting, just too hot. They can't stand the heat, right? So if we lower the temperature by, say, 5 degrees, how much is it going to cost? Something like that. We did all kinds of analysis. But then I learned something, right? In North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, okay, every month there are about 400 applicants. 400 people come here and apply for the job, okay, to work in the warehouse. Okay? But there is a mandatory drug test in the United States because so many people use drugs. Okay? You have to do the urine test And after the drug test, guess what? About 3/4 of them, 300 people fail the drug test. Right? So they're left with less than 100. Right? So basically, if you apply and if you pass the drug test, you are accepted. Right? There is no quality screening or you just accept everybody, just about everybody who passes the drug test. Right? And that's why the turnover rate is too high. Anyway, so we're going to continue this discussion on Thursday. All right.